Coming tonight. For sure you got something that they provide. Oh, David, the men's club has got a little food over there, so you can feed body as well as mind.
I'll take those. Go get some food.
So you've got to promise to eat quietly, though. Okay. Impossible. Impossible. Well, let's begin. Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Loving and good God, we give you thanks and praise for all of your many gifts to us. The gift of your Son, our Lord Jesus, who shows us your love. The gift of your Spirit, who moves in our hearts and in our lives. The gift of faith. The gift of community. The gift of your call to follow after you. We ask your blessings upon us this night, that as we learn of those who have gone before us, as we seek to follow after them, that we may draw closer to you, to them, and to each other. And we ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. So, this is it. We're going to try to get you up to date this evening. We're going to try to get through. And so this fifth little bit of, and they do have beer. I didn't see a fifth, but they got beer over there. So
Great.
This fifth little bit, this concluding episode in our history presentation is once again the study of history that's a conversation. It is a conversation. We've been having one ever since we began back in November. And once again, we initially started with the idea of mission. And whether that mission was in 1493 or any of the succeeding years, or even right now, mission means that if you wish to be heard, first you must listen. You know, that's been one of the underlying dynamics of Franciscan mission and Franciscan evangelization and Franciscan presence. To listen. That's a part of what the Franciscans are always about. And the Franciscans are also always about proclaiming the gospel. To proclaim the gospel wherever, whenever, wherever you are, with whoever you are with. So that proclaiming the gospel and especially to accompany those on the margins. We said this is what happened with the missions, and it's what happened all through the immigrant era as well, from the 1850s to the 1900s and even later. And it's what's happening still right now. Franciscans on the margins and with people proclaiming the gospel. Well, last week we concluded with the entry into a golden U.S. Catholic era. And I used this chalice to illustrate that. It was kind of a golden coming together of a sense of triumph, a sense of national purpose that had happened during World War II, that time of coming together and being united. And so this chalice that's so representative of that, the Purple Heart, that a mother who had lost a son put on her other son's chalice when he was ordained, that combination of things, that bringing together of nation, of faith, that was so much a part of that golden U.S. Catholic era, which, as I mentioned last week, actually started, the golden Catholic 50s started in 1945, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, with the end of World War II, and it goes into the 1960s. And during that time, there were lots of seminarians. This was those following in the footsteps of older brothers, following in the footsteps of uncles, following in the footsteps of fathers who had sacrificed during the war, who had been part of something bigger and wanted to contribute to something bigger. And so you have young men entering the seminaries in record numbers. during the 1950s, that kind of a hero worship, of following after them. This is in Cincinnati, and this was the high school seminary, and this always amazes me. You know, you think of the Midwest as we're kind of proper, we do things well and so on, and those West Coast people, well, they're all laid back and they're all relaxed and informal. Okay, this is Cincinnati. This is at the same time in Santa Barbara. Those laid back, informal seminarians in California. You know, that contrast. So there are lots of seminarians, but look at this. Here are some statistics between 1950 and 1960. First of all, look at the U.S. population. This was the baby boom. In 10 years, the population grew by 18.5% of the whole country. But if there was a baby boom for the country, look at the Catholic population and what happened. It grew by 51%. 51%. This was truly the time of the big families. Some of you probably come from some of those big families. You know, the families with 8, 10 children, sometimes 12. I mean, you know, big families. And so with that, you also have a huge increase of the number of priests in the United States between 1950 and 1960. We went from 43,000 diocesan priests to 54,000 diocesan priests. Excuse me, that's total priests. This is total priests, not diocesan. But total priests. And so that's an increase of 25.6%. It's 1/4 increase. At all levels, seminarians went from 26,000 to 40,000, or 53%. That's at the same rate as the Catholic population. So that it would have remained the same ratio. You would have had the same number of priests per Catholic that you had in 1950 if that had continued on. But look at this statistic. These are two provinces for which it was easy enough for me to get the statistics. St. John the Baptist province, which is headquartered in Cincinnati, and St. Barbara province in California. Look at this. While the U.S. priests are increasing by 25, the seminarians by 53, the solemn professed friars, which is the Franciscan equivalent of making a lifetime commitment, like a diocesan priest does when they're ordained. A Franciscan makes that lifetime commitment with solemn profession of vows. 17.5%, 12.5%. It was nowhere near what was happening with the priests overall. And here is my Bing Crosby theory of why. The Bells of St. Mary, released on the 6th of December 1945. I told you the 1950s for Catholicism began in 1945. That this movie that was an enormous success. And Bing Crosby is the diocesan priest who does good and does well. This is a man who played golf every week. This is a man, I mean, in the movie, he plays golf, he sings, he has a good time. He's, and that's what a diocesan priest was doing. So this whole idea of, gee, if I become a Franciscan, I may get sent off to a missionary in the Philippines, or I may get sent all those kinds of things. The diocesan priest, here I am, I get to stay home, I get to be near my family, I get to do good and do well. So this is why, this is part for me of why the diocesan clergy increased at a much faster rate during the 1950s than Franciscans did. But things were going to change. On November 7th, 1960, when a good Catholic boy went to bed, he could dream of doing two great things. The first was to be the Gipper, to be a football hero at Notre Dame. What kind of a greater thing could you do than that? Well, become a priest. That was the other great thing that those boys could dream of when they went to bed on that night in November 7th of 1960. But the next night, the dreams changed. After the election in 1960, there was a sudden sense of arrival of Catholics, that we had arrived in this country. The highest office in the land was going to be held by a Catholic, an Irish Catholic. It made a tremendous sense of change, of this was a moment. And since that moment, I would like to point out that since this past January 20th, we have had something that we have never, ever had before in the United States. The President, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, which is the highest official of Congress, and the Chief Justice of the United States are all Roman Catholics. That has never happened before. Never, ever happened. And most of those anti-Catholics, even in the 1950s or earlier, or can't believe it, can't dream of such a thing, or could not have dreamed of such a thing happening. And there's pushback, obviously. There's going to be some pushback for that sense of, from left and right, that whole sense of, gee, this is something new and this is something different, but it's something to think about. What does it mean for us? What does it mean for us that we are such a part of our country and of the culture now here? That we are so entwined with the culture of the United States. So this means that basically we're going to be across the board involved in almost everything. And in the 1960s, that started happening. You had, through the 1960s and the 1970s, this incredible cultural change. Incredible, fast happening cultural change. As I look at this group, I am aware that many of you were aware of some of these things in the 1960s. Many of you were aware of some of these things in general. I mean, I was 7 years old or 6 years old when the 1960s started and 16 when they ended. So I was barely aware of all of these things. But I was aware of them. I mean, you heard them, you saw them, you knew them from television and the popular culture and the media. So, the college campuses with question authority, don't trust anyone over 30, all of those kinds of things, that was going on. Feminism was getting started with the Equal Rights Amendment, the push for an Equal Rights Amendment. There was gay liberation, which I like to point out this. Most historians point to 1969 and a riot in New York as the beginning of the gay rights movement. But Troy Perry founded the first Metropolitan Community Church, which was a Christian church that was deliberately open to and deliberately sought to be of service to gay and lesbian people in 1968. So before there was that, before there was that sense of militancy, there was a sense of service. There was a sense of recognition of the value and the good and the truth of the Christian message for everyone. So Troy Perry, 1968, I see as a beginning of a real gay rights movement. But then we also had the other things, the terrible things that were happening because of all of this upset and upheaval. And so you get Roe v. Wade in 1973 as we enter into the 1970s. And that continues to be a black cloud over our culture, and it continues to be something that is to be dealt with. And so you've got liberal and conservative, you've got action and reaction, all of these things happening through the 1960s and 1970s, and all of them because the Catholic Church is so engaged and so involved and so incarnational a part of the culture that's going on here in the United States. All of those things are going to touch us as well. Here's one example. In 1962, Our Lady of Good Harbor, which was a church run by Franciscans from St. John the Baptist province in Louisiana, said, we are going to integrate. We are going to have black and white students sitting down together in the classrooms. And the day before school was to open that fall, the school was bombed. In Greenwood, Mississippi, Nathaniel Macheski, who had been there since the mid-1950s in Greenwood, was a part of the civil rights movement going on there at the time. And this was what was written about him in a publication that was published by the Ku Klux Klan. The local arm of the communist conspiracy has grouped itself into what is known as the Greenwood Movement. This outfit is being led by a black-hearted Catholic priest. Remember, this is Baptist Mississippi, with a white face and a blood-red political philosophy. His name, Nathaniel Macheski, has appeared in previous bulletins of the KKK. He has been allowed to carry on his revolutionary activities here in Greenwood much too long. He will one day leave here, one way or another. I mean, this was what was going on, and the church and the friars were involved, but not just the friars, other Franciscans as well. Again, how many secular Franciscans? We've got a bunch of secular Franciscans, right? In 1947, you were way ahead of the friars. In 1947, the National Secular Franciscan Quinquennial was being held in Cincinnati. Now, 1947, there were still all kinds of discriminatory laws that said that blacks and whites could not mix in public places in Cincinnati. And so the secular Franciscans made a deliberate effort to integrate their meetings. What they did was they made sure that there was as it was, quote, colored businessman's hotel next door to the Netherlands Hilton where they were having their meeting. And so because the African Americans could not stay at the Netherlands Hilton, they stayed next door. But they also, the seculars, got the Netherlands Hilton to declare for the time of their meeting, their big ballroom, their dining room, to be a private area instead of a public area, so that they could have their meetings and eat together. It was a bold move. It was a bold move on the part of the secular Franciscans in those days. And in 1963, the secular Franciscans also gave their the St. Francis Peace Medal. That's what they gave the St. Francis Peace Medal to Martin Luther King Jr. Now the secular Franciscans beat the Nobel Prize. You awarded him before the Nobel Peace. He got the Nobel Peace Prize before he was, it's just something. It was amazing. some of the forward-looking, some of the efforts in the midst of all of this controversy and turmoil that's going on. Some of these efforts were just amazing. And we also learned that not all discrimination is African American. Some of it was others too. And so Hispanic Americans, Latino Americans, the immigrants and farm workers. So we have, Cesar Chavez beginning the struggle for the civil rights of the farm workers which were mostly Latino, in the 1960s and 70s. And here he is with one of his great friends, Brother Timothy Arthur of the province of Santa Barbara in California. And he's taking some time away, a getaway time, which he frequently did. Cesar Chavez was a man of enormous faith and deep faith. And he took time away to be on retreat with the Franciscans. At least, a couple of 3 times a year, he would spend time there at San Miguel Mission. So this connection, that's another connection. And here's one, too. The AIDS epidemic comes a little bit later. The AIDS epidemic, as it explodes onto the scene, comes in, really it's about early 1980s, isn't it, Ralph? I think more than the 70s. But it's following up on that. And so here we've got Tao House in New Orleans, which was a house of hospitality. And Ralph, you want to say anything more about Tao House? Ralph was a member of Tao House for a while.
It was a place where people who felt that they were on the edge of the church could feel welcome. So you had a lot of justice and peace folks, you had divorced people, gay and lesbian people, people frustrated with the institutionalism in the church that they found.
So here it is. I mean, good things that continue to happen, And over all of this, through the 1960s and 70s, we have this specter of the Vietnam War. And the Vietnam War was different from all of the wars that we have fought since, because basically, I will put it this way. The government has learned to keep pictures off the TV of the war going on. Vietnam is the only war in U.S. history that was fought in the living room. It was fought in the living room because they would take the film one day, they would have the news film would happen one day, it would get developed and put on a plane and flown to the West Coast so that the next day it was on the national news. The next evening we watched it with Walter Cronkite. We watched it with Huntley Brinkley. And way too often, this is what we watched. This is what we saw. Death and destruction. And so, all of these things, all of this turmoil, all of this upset, all of these things are going on. And where do you turn? What do you do in turbulent times? St. Michael, defend us in battle. Give us a good, solid church. So we've got St. Michael, the statue here. This is St. Michael Mission in St. Michael's, Arizona. I mean, give us a good, solid church. That's the place of refuge. That's the place where we want to go. We want something secure and solid and certain in our faith. That's where we look for it when times are uncertain in the world. But guess what was going on in the church? Vatican II. And Vatican II was, it was 2,800, more than 2,800 bishops gathered for Vatican II. That is the greatest collection of bishops in the history of the church. Never before nor since have there been that many. And so if you've got 2,800 bishops gathered together, there is one thing of which I am absolutely certain. The Holy Spirit was there too. The Holy Spirit was there. And so in that Vatican II, in those 2+ years of meetings, they issued documents on the liturgy, which was actually one of the very first documents, on ecclesiology, how the church is to be structured and what the church means. On ecumenism, for the first time ever, there was a recognition that, other people can be of goodwill and maybe disagree with us on how to worship, but that doesn't mean that we should just throw up a wall between them and us. We should approach, we should deal with them. On the laity, the place of the laity in the church, this was a radical new idea. That it's not just pay, pray, and obey. It's that the laity have a place, that the laity are important in the church, on priests, on bishops, on religious life, on religious liberty, that people should have freedom of conscience. The church had never spoken out before to say that about everybody. It said that the church should be liberal, or should be free, but to have religious liberty for everyone was a new concept. On social communication, we need some updates on that one, because that was the big social communication in those days with radio and television. I mean, now, my goodness, the social communication we've got is just so far beyond that. But the document of Vatican II that is probably most far-reaching in all of its consequences is the church in the modern world, which is also called Gaudium et Spes, or the pastoral constitution. This is the first thing. It's a pastoral constitution. It is not a doctrinal statement. It is a pastoral constitution. This is, instead of doctrine to share, this is an attitude to have. The attitude that we should have in our life as part of the church. Gaudium et Spes, joys and hopes. The griefs and anxieties of those of this age, especially those who are poor or in any way afflicted. These two are the joys and hopes, the griefs and anxieties of the followers of Christ. Indeed, nothing genuinely human fails to raise an echo in their hearts. I mean, we are to be incarnate in the world as Christ was incarnate in a human body. We are in the human world. And so hence the Second Vatican Council, having probed more profoundly into the mystery of the church, addresses itself without hesitation not only to the church and to all who invoke the name of Christ, but to the whole of humanity. We are here for everybody, whether they agree with us or not. We are meant to be here for everybody, the whole of humanity, where the Council yearns to explain to everyone how it conceives of the presence and activity of the church in the world today, to be the leaven in the loaf, to be the leaven in the loaf. And so this enormous change in the attitude of the church comes at a critical moment. It comes at a critical moment because whether there had been Vatican II or not, there were changes on the way in the United States because of culture and society. And so here's some of what happens. As I say, 1945, 1946 to 1963 is that triumphant church. But look what happens. In 1946, 24 million Catholics. In 2015, the last time for which I have access to statistics, good statistics. 71 million. So the church has grown. See how the church has grown? Huge, huge amount. And here is one of the ways the church grows, by infant baptism. But if you look at that, if you look at the growth and the infant baptism and the numbers and start breaking it down into the baptisms per 1,000 Catholics, this is a way to look at it, that it's not just that there are more baptisms each year, but how many baptisms are there in relationship to how many Catholics there are? So this number becomes critical. The baptisms per 1,000 Catholics, it's 28.9 in 1946. It peaks in 1960 at 32.9, continues at 30.1 in 1963. And then it starts going down and down and down. So that it's 11.6 as of 2015. The number, the increase in the church, the rate of increase through infant baptism has just dropped tremendously. It's a third of what it was in 1960. So why? Well, the richer the household, the fewer the babies. The richer the household, the fewer the babies. That has been true throughout U.S. history. That as Catholics engaged and involved in the culture, grew economically into a better and better state, especially after World War II. Especially after World War II. Because what had happened after World War II, the Catholic GIs got the GI Bill and got to go to college. They got to move to the suburbs. They got the jobs. They got all of this, the industry that boomed after World War II, and the industrial workers and the unions. The fact that the unions were so strong in the 1950s and 60s, and so the wages of everyone grew. Whether you were an industrial worker, whether you were college educated, whatever it was, they all grew through the 1950s and 60s. So Catholics, instead of living cramped in the inner city ghetto or living cramped in neighborhoods that were Catholic neighborhoods, imagine the difference between this neighborhood in 1956 or 1960 and today. It's a vastly different population because so many people have moved into the suburbs. They went into the suburbs. And when you move into the suburbs, you start having 2 or 3 kids instead of 6 or 8. All of those kinds of things were happening. And boom, this all dropped the number of baptisms per 1,000 Catholics. It just happened that in a sense it coincides with following up on Vatican II. But here's what else happened because of Vatican II. Look at this statistic. There were 700,000 infant baptisms in 2015. There were 114,000 adults received into the church. We didn't even keep track of that because it was such a small number in these earlier years. We didn't even keep track on a general way of how many were being received into the church as adults because it was statistically insignificant. But look, it's a seventh, it's more than a seventh, more than 1 in 7 or more than 1 in 8 new Catholics in 2015 were adults instead of babies. That's a tremendous change that happened because of Vatican II. I'm convinced of that. It happened because of Vatican II. It's what happened with me. You know, the first time I ever stepped into a Catholic church in 1971, the Mass was in English. I didn't know exactly what was going on, but I could understand. And that's what drew me, and that's what attracted me, and that's what brought me in. I was fascinated to hear yesterday from the pulpit here, the young seminarian who was speaking to us from Kendrick Seminary entered the church when he was a senior in high school. He was a convert. He is a convert. I mean, this change is tremendous. It's part of a huge amount of change that is going on. But it leaves us with one other question. What had the Holy Spirit meant by the people of God at Vatican II? We started talking about the people of God, the people of God. Well, the people of God, it seems, are more than priests and sisters and brothers. 1966 to 1978, 10,000 priests left. 1964, there were 47,000 seminarians. In 2015, there were 4,785. And in 1966, the U.S. women religious peaked at 181,000. In 2015, there were fewer than 50,000. In between 64 and 84, 241 U.S. seminaries closed. Now, most of those seminaries were high school seminaries. And we just realized this doesn't work in our day, in our culture. To take kids at age 14 and put them, pull them away from their families, pull them away from home, it just doesn't work. That we need to do, things different. But here's the picture. One more thing I want to say about the difference in religious women. In 1966, how many women in the United States were running multi-million-dollar corporations if they weren't nuns, if they weren't sisters? Zero. My suspicion is it's zero. But how many sisters were running multi-million-dollar corporations in 1966? A whole bunch. A whole bunch. This is one of those places where our women religious led the way and truly helped other women realize their potential, helped society realize the potential of women. And I think it's something that it is an incredible gift that women religious in this country especially have given to the culture, is a recognition of the talents and the abilities of women that would have otherwise never happened if not for those religious women. If not for those religious women, if not for their courage, if not for their intelligence, if not for their perseverance, if not for their faith, if not for their strength, none of those things would have happened. But thanks to their faith and their courage and their intelligence and their perseverance, hospital systems, school systems, the education of so many kids, all because of those religious women. We owe a debt of gratitude to them that we will never be able to repay. Never be able to repay. And a lot of them were Franciscans. As a matter of fact, there are 3 things God doesn't know.
God doesn't know what a Jesuit's thinking. God doesn't know where those poor Franciscans get all their money. And God doesn't know how many different kinds of Franciscan sisters there are. So, you know, all of those sisters, the debt of gratitude that we owe to them is tremendous. But with those changes, like the changes of the closing of seminaries, here's something else that has happened. In 1968, the internal schools that all of these religious communities have been running just started to disappear. Catholic Theological Union. Ralph, who else was in the first group? Is anybody else here? Bob, when did you go to see?
2 years after.
2 years after. And so,
The Servites and the Passionists and the Franciscans.
right, Servites, Passionists, but anyway, so Sacred Heart Province was the Franciscans with the Servites and the Passionists there. And then eventually, all of the Franciscan provinces in the United States would go to these unions, these different schools that were made up of groups. And with one kind of exception, this is Mission Santa Barbara. And this part, all of that was built in the 1950s because of that explosion of seminarians in the 1950s. And 12 years later, it was closed. 12 years later, they had to leave there because they didn't have the numbers. And so they joined the Graduate Theological Union. Now the Franciscan School of Theology is in San Diego, at the University of San Diego, and still exists as its own entity. So it's a kind of an exception to the model of CTU, but it's only there because it's within the university. So this is again that changing of dependence on priests and nuns and brothers to a recognition of the role of the laity. And here's an example of that. In 1978, Pope St. Paul VI issued a new rule for secular Franciscans to abrogated the one from the 1890s and issued this new rule that was in part written by secular Franciscans to recognize them as their own order, that they're not an auxiliary of the Friars or of anybody else, that they have a place in the church as people who are part of what God is doing, what the Holy Spirit is doing in the whole church, that the secular Franciscans have that place and have that spot, and that God has things for them to do as lay people who are leaven in the loaf of society. You know, and so there it is. We have this going on, and it's not just that cooperation. There's going to be lots and lots of other cooperation. Communications. Here, these examples of communications. These are 5 just incredible examples of Franciscan communicators. Justin was asked to appear on, it was a comedy show in Polish, and this couple was fighting and they were going to get divorced in this comedy show on the radio in 1927. Well, he comes in and talks to them and tells them about what the church says, and that leads to him having his own program. Meanwhile, also Cormac Antrim heard a Protestant preacher on the radio on the Navajo, in Navajo, and he said, "Wait a minute, we should be doing this." He began the Padres Hour on the 5th of May, 1957, and it's still going. And here's the wonderful thing. Cormac died a few years ago, but Maynard, a Navajo who is a friar, has continued the program. So it's gone uninterrupted since 1957. And then there is this lady. You might have heard of her. Anybody seen her picture before? Okay, so EWTN she launched a network of TV stations when the bishops couldn't get one off the ground. So, it's just a fantastic thing. And then, from my province, there's Richard Rohr, who 400,000 people a day get his daily email because they have subscribed to it. Now, it's free, you don't have to pay, but you have to subscribe. You do have to subscribe. And so this working with laity, working for the bringing the faith to the people, just continues and continues and continues. And also to be a voice for those who have no voice. This is Franciscans International, which is an NGO, non-governmental organization, which is a special kind of membership at the United Nations. It's a consultative, and they got Category 1 status, or general consultative status, in 1995. And so there are Franciscans at the UN who are there to speak for those on the margins. They're there, that's what they're about. And so this has been going on. Franciscans International is also at the UN office in Geneva. And Michael Perry, who used to be here, was very involved with the Franciscans at the UN. So here we've got this. So these wonderful good things going on. But remember what I showed you about the ups and the downs at the very beginning? Well, there are still some downs. 4% is the accepted statistic for how many adult men children. That's the accepted statistic across the board. And unfortunately, it is held true in the church as well. This is the estimate, is that that we have had that kind of thing has happened with approximately 4% of the members of the church. And it is something that we will be dealing with forever. We will be dealing with it forever because it is so horrendous. It is so terrible to think about any child being abused. And so this is why there was the Dallas Charter. This is why we go through classes. This is why we have testing before people enter the order anymore. We have all of these things going on because we know we've got to do away with this. That 4% is not acceptable. 0.0000001% is not acceptable. None of it is acceptable. And so that is something that the Friars and the church will be dealing with. But meanwhile, as I say, there are still heroes among us. This one, along about 9/11, remember that? Anybody? And this, probably one of the most famous photographs from that day. That is Father Michael Judge, O.F.M, being carried out. The first identified casualty at 9/11, at the World Trade Center. Not because he was there when the planes hit the buildings, but because he rushed from 31st Street on Manhattan to come to be there as a fire department chaplain. So he rushed, he was there, he was rushing into the building when part of it collapsed, and he was killed. And he's the first identified because all of the firemen knew him. All of the firemen knew him. He was their chaplain. So he's victim number one. So that being with the people so much a part of what Franciscans are meant to be and who we try and strive to be. Another one, this is a Coast Guard helicopter taking off from the top of the school, St. Mary of the Angels in New Orleans during hurricane or following Hurricane Katrina. There are 3 friars in this crowd. There are 3 friars who were there with the people of their parish and their neighborhood all through Hurricane Katrina as they took refuge in the upper floors of the school next door to the church. You know, and so this too is part of who we are, to be with those on the margins. But we have not always been true to our own ideals. We have not always been true to our own ideals. I'm the first to admit that. And we need to seek equality at home. And here are 3 sterling examples of that. This is Brad Compliment, who is a friend of mine, who was elected to the International Council of the O.F.Ms in 1985. In 1985, he was elected to the General Council. He was the first non-ordained to serve as an officer of one of the worldwide officers, but he was on the council. He didn't hold an administrative post, he held a deliberative post in 1985. In 2002, the Capuchins in Detroit elected Robert Smith to be their minister provincial. But the bureaucrats in Rome said, no. 2 weeks. Can you imagine bureaucrats acting in 2 weeks? But anyway, in 2 weeks they said no. This is Mark Schenk, who is the minister provincial of the Capuchins in Denver. And his story is extraordinary. When he had been on their general council, he was very obviously the most qualified man in the room when they were having elections for minister provincial. He was elected overwhelmingly by his brothers, lay and ordained, knowing full well the history of what had happened 17 years earlier. Only this time, there was a little bit of a difference. There was somebody who knew Mark Schenk very well. His name was Sean O'Malley, the Cardinal Archbishop of Boston, who just happened to be on his way to Rome to meet with his friend, Pope Francis, about some other matters. He wrote up a little bit about Mark and why Mark should be allowed to serve as minister provincial, and personally hand-delivered the note to Pope Francis, who read it and who said, well, why not? Yes. And so the bureaucrats were overruled in this case. And Mark is serving as minister provincial. It's a blow for that equality. So, but all of this is going on. All of this is going on as we've got all kinds of history being made. As I say, the changes are happening. All these changes are happening. In 2012, the Minister General, who is this guy, the Minister General called together the provincial councils of the 7 provinces of O.F.Ms in the United States and said, look to your future, look to your future, look at your present, take a good look at it, and look to your future and see what you need to do. And so 7 friars were called to do that, 1 from each of the 7 provinces. This is Mike Jenrick, who used to live across the street here, and this is me, who does live across the street here. So we were part of that commission in 2012, 2013. Here's what we found: that with 7 provinces, and if you included, this is where we were in the United States. This is where we were in 2012 with a number of friars. 3 in Alaska, 132 in California, 1 in Colorado. We were scattered all over. We were doing different things. And this, by the way, also includes those in formation. It's not just the solemn professed, it's those in formation as well. So the 7 provinces, it's 1,229 then. But this is what we found when we looked a little deeper at the solemn professed, those who have made a lifetime commitment, those who we know are committed to being friars for the rest of their life. Number 1, it was only 1,100, and of those, in 2012, we know that by 2025, that will be 703. And over half of those will be over 73 years old. And that means, we think there'll only be like 506 friars demographically ready for active ministry. But with divided into 7 provinces, as that many different provinces and all the offices you have to have in every province and so on, that would mean we would probably have 354 friars left in 2025 available for external ministry. That is to be doing what we do of proclaiming the gospel and being with those on the margins. So we knew that we had a serious, serious situation. And in the middle of this serious situation, guess what happens? On the 13th of March, 2013, Pope Francis is elected. And what was the very first thing he did? The very first thing he did was ask us to pray for him before he blessed us. If you wish to be heard, first you must listen. It took a Jesuit to bring that back to mind for us. And so as Margaret Carney, who is the sister who used to be president of St. Bonaventure University, said once in a talk I heard, I have good news and I have bad news about the election of Pope Francis. The good news is we finally have a Pope who takes Franciscan things seriously. The bad news is we finally have a Pope who takes Franciscan things seriously. So we have to too. We have to be about our Franciscan calling. We have to be about who we are as Franciscans. We have to be about renewal. This is what the commission said. And so here, we have, and that renewal is by fidelity. And look what the Pope said to us in 2015 about that. You have inherited the trust of the people of God through minority, through brotherhood, through meekness, through humility, through poverty. Please preserve it. Don't lose it. The people care for you. They love you. That's what he said about us. And so talk about, then I guess we got to live up to that. We got to try to do that. And so so here we are trying to do that, for the last several years. And we do that with renewal by fidelity to who we are called to be. That's what renewal is. It's fidelity to your call. Then we do it by collaboration, working together, which we've been doing in many, many different ways for a number of years. This is a picture from 1936 of Capuchins, conventuals, and O.F.Ms meeting together to work together in Santa Barbara. We haven't always done that collaboration too well with the laity and women, and especially women religious, but we are called to it and we need to try it. And structures, we need to restructure. We need to restructure because it's something that John Vaughan, a former Minister General, once told me. Friars do not exist to serve structures. Structures exist to serve the fraternal life and ministry of the friars. And this is the example. This is a chart of how the friars, the whole general order of the friars, has divided and gotten together and divided and got together and divided and got together and ended up as 3 different groups that started as one with Francis, because we are constantly called, we structure and restructure ourselves. So since the time of Francis, we've been doing that, and we now need to do it again. And then our mission, we've got to go back to our mission, who we are. We are Franciscan friars in the United States. We're a brotherhood of vowed men striving to live the gospel of Jesus Christ simply and authentically in the spirit of St. Francis. We experience God's unconditional love through our fraternal life, prayer, and ongoing conversion. And having experienced that love, we go through the world as heralds of the gospel, seeking to welcome, accept, and accompany those all we meet. So that's who we are. Our vision, that's who we are, then who we want to be, is a national brotherhood. That's why I'm here. That's what I'm working on right now, living across the street. And if we didn't have enough in the way of our Franciscan history to inspire us to these things. We've got Pope Francis, who keeps calling us to them. You know, with Laudato Si, you know, which he takes, I mean, he is the most Franciscan Jesuit you ever met. And so here he is quoting Francis of Assisi over and over again. Laudato Si, praise to you, my Lord. You know, that his encyclical on the environment and on the earth, on our mother. And what he says there, you know, praise to you, my Lord. In the words of the beautiful canticle, St. Francis of Assisi reminds us that our common home is like a sister with whom we share our life, and a beautiful mother who opens her arms to embrace us. Praise to you, my Lord, through our sister, Mother Earth, who sustains and governs us, and who produces various fruit with colored flowers and herbs. That we are responsible to our mother. We are responsible with our mother and for our mother. You know, so that Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti, his most recent or more recent encyclical, that you know, we are brothers and sisters. We are brothers and sisters who live in a world where we are called to encounter one another as we are and share good news. So that Fratelli Tutti. And this, by the way, do you recognize all three people in this picture? Let's see, this guy you've probably seen before. And let's see, this I've taken the beard away, but the profile is still pretty much the same. And then the one in the middle who's trying to explain to the Pope where New Mexico is. He's trying desperately, how do I tell the Pope where New Mexico is? Anyway, that's Michael Perry, a local boy who made good here from St. Louis. He was the minister provincial across the street when he was elected vicar general of the order and then minister general of the order, and served at that until just this past summer. And so now he's I think he's getting ready to work more. I mean, he's just getting ready to work more. So all that is saying, what is saying here, what I'm saying is the conversation continues. The conversation continues. This is how I would sum up what we've been doing for the last 5 weeks. If you wish to be heard, first you listen in any conversation. And in that conversation, we are called to the glory of God. What did St. Augustine say, or Thomas Aquinas, or somebody, one of those people said? You know, that the glory of God are human beings fully alive, fully who we are supposed to be. And we are called to be Christians. I got asked once, can you define what Jesus taught in one sentence? And I said, can I have 2 clauses? And they said, okay, we'll give you 2 clauses. All right, the 2 clauses are, believe that God loves you and live your life in response to that love. That's what Jesus taught. That's what we are to do as Christians. And so some of us are called to always be Franciscan. Others are called to be Franciscan some of the time. And that means to proclaim the gospel, to accompany those on the margins. And so with that, the last thing I will tell you is, don't stop learning. Don't stop learning. But remember that conversation. Remember that conversation. And also, Patrick has been very kind. You can go to YouTube and search for the Franciscan Father Jack Parkman, or search for St. Anthony of Padua STL, and you can watch this all over again if you really have terrible insomnia. You can watch it all over again. So there you are. But I want to go back and leave you with these thoughts. Leave you with this summation of the conversation to this point. That we're called to the glory of God, to be human beings, to be fully human, and to be fully Christian. And some of us called always, and others of us called sometimes, to be Franciscan. So human and Christian and Franciscan. That's what we talk about in our formation programs. But with that, questions?
Well, we certainly do want to thank Father Jack for his generosity in saying yes when he was asked to do these classes. I didn't know what his answer would be, and I didn't know what the turnout would be. But it's glad that so many of you were able to come and stick with it, these 5 sessions. And regardless of what he says, I don't think any of us found it to be boring or anything like that. So thank you very much. And thanks for your generosity.
Okay, I thoroughly enjoyed.
Well, thank you.
Okay, so what other topics did you provide?
Yes.
What's next on the agenda?
Oh my goodness. Well, what would you like to hear? I could, but I need to tell you something. My great grandfather started teaching when he was 16 years old in 1872. He, his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, his great-great-grandchildren, his great-great-great-grandchild have been teaching in the public schools of Carter County, Kentucky every day they've been open since 1872. Most of us can teach things we don't know better than most people can teach things they do. So that's the
Well,
joke.
I just would hope that you would have another topic.
Well, they're open.
And I would come.
Oh my, thank you. Well, I'll talk with Father Jim and we'll see what we can.
It's been excellent.
Oh, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Yes?
Yeah, so when are you gonna merge into one?
Okay, the date is set for the week of the 16th through the 20th of October, 2023. That's when the 6 provinces, because I didn't go into it, but one of the provinces has dropped out of the process. So there are now 6 provinces that are engaged in this process of coming together that I'm a part of. And so the 6 provinces, Holy Name Province in New York is part of it, St. John the Baptist Province in Cincinnati, Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary Province in Wisconsin, Sacred Heart Province here in St. Louis, Our Lady of Guadalupe in Albuquerque, and St. Barbara Province in California. These 6 provinces voted in May of 2018, and each one in individual but simultaneous chapters. They each one voted to petition the Minister General to suppress us and create one new province where 6 had been before. So that's what's happening. So to go back to, in some ways, to go back to that picture of that map. To go back to this map. This will, in essence, and this is a little bit more because this was all 7 provinces. So we have, among the 6, we have nobody in Ontario. And we've got fewer in Massachusetts and New York and Connecticut. But this is where we will be one coast-to-coast province, which just happens to be, somebody remind me, just happens to be the name of a book that you can find on Amazon. Franciscan Friars, Coast to Coast, you know, because we will be Atlantic to Pacific, we're Gulf to the Great Lakes. We are coast to coast. And this is a little tiny overview and pictures of the 6 provinces that are coming together. And so that's that. Okay, so October of 2023 is the date. Other questions? Thank you.
Thank you, brother.
Do they have any cold pork left?
Everyone might agree.